Hello and welcome to the first ever BBC Tiny Happy People Facebook Live with me, Harry Judd. Now, as a dad of three, I'm very excited to be part of this Facebook Live this evening, and hopefully, like you guys at home, I will be learning lots about all things speech and language. So today, we'll be learning all about how little ones develop their speech and language skills. So if you're a parent or a guardian interested in discovering more about how your child's speech, language and communication develops, and have a burning question you need answering, then look no further than right here, live on all Tiny Happy People socials. So we'll be live on Facebook and Instagram, which is just live over here. And we'll be here for the next hour, but if you want the best quality experience, then we suggest you head over to our Facebook page. So let's get into it. Joining me today are our three expert speech and language therapists. We've got Manal, we've got Louisa and Janet, not Jeanette. Is that right?
It's right.
It's Jeanette Manrara I blame for that. Right, so Manal.
It's fine.
Honestly, I need the speech and language help. I've been struggling with the pronunciations all day. But so if you could introduce yourself to our audience at home, tell us a little about your backstory and your experiences.
Absolutely. I'm Monal. I am a speech and language therapist. That's why I'm here. And I'm an independent speech therapist. I work in the areas of northwest London and Oxford. I've been practicing for almost 22 years now, and I love what I do. I was born and raised in London by my family who moved over into the UK in the late 60s. So I've always been sort of exposed to lots of different languages, different dialects, communities, cultures. And I guess that's probably been the basis for my passion, growing in learning about languages and linguistics and things like that. And I love working with children and parents. So it kind of just made sense for me to pursue a career in speech and language therapy.
Sounds like a perfect job for you. How many languages did you grow up with? What was
Three.
It? Three?
Yes, including English.
English,
Gujarati and Hindi.
Amazing.
And
Wow.
a bit of Swahili, actually.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, I speak English.
Very well.
So, Janet, yourself, how about you? Tell us about yourself.
So also speech and language therapist. I've worked for 34 years for the NHS. So I currently work for Midlands Partnership Foundation Trust, and I run something called Stoke Speaks Out, which has got lots of preventative and targeted things for parents to do as well. And just like Monal, I absolutely love working with children, and talking is my passion, you can probably tell. So that gift of communication and to help children achieve that gift of communication is just priceless, and it never wears off. So even after all these years, it's still an exciting job to do.
Brilliant, brilliant. And Louisa, you work for a charity called Speech and Language UK. Please tell us a bit about that and, of course, yourself.
Yeah, so Speech Language UK, we're equally passionate about children being able to talk and to understand words, because we know how important that is. You know, none of us would be able to do what we do unless we were really good at talking. And children need to be good at talking to help them to learn and make friends and do lots of things. And at Speech and Language UK, we have lots of resources to help them. We've got a helpline that people can call if they're concerned, and a checker they can look at to see where children are in terms of where they need to be for their speech and language. It's a great organisation to work for.
Brilliant, it sounds it. So, day to day, for those at home watching tonight, can you guys explain exactly what an SLT, or speech and language therapist, does?
Yeah, so a children's speech and language therapist works with a whole range of difficulties with communication, and that might be anything from understanding, from talking clearly, and things like social skills, like taking turns, those kind of things. And some speech therapists also work with swallowing difficulties as well. But speech therapists also work with adults, which obviously we're not discussing tonight, but you know, there's a whole range of communication difficulties that we could work with.
I guess working in your charity, you see that whole range as well, right?
Well, we're a children's charity,
Right,
but we
okay.
see a range of children with speech and language conditions that need support. But we also support a lot of teachers and early years practitioners to help children as well. So it's not all about speech and language therapists doing that. It also is an opportunity for us to talk to everybody who works with children and to parents themselves about how talking develops and how you can help it.
So, is it only speech and language therapists who can support happy children's communication development, or are there other people that can get involved?
Absolutely not. I mean, obviously, we always say that the parents or the caregivers or the people, other professionals that work with children in a nursery or education setting, they're the ones that they're first-hand models of language. So the way we work as speech therapists is we always involve parents and the other caregivers with strategies on how to look out for speech and language difficulties, or also strategies to help develop their speech and language, because they're really in the best position to help them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a slight digression, but it's like, it reminds me of my wife. She goes to my daughter's violin lessons, and the teacher makes it a lot about my wife being there, because she's the one that's at home with her, practicing with her every day, and the parents are obviously the ones that are with the children the most.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Carryover skills are key, basically.
exactly.
Yeah.
What support can speech and language therapists offer children that have additional needs?
So a whole raft of things. I mean, mainly what our role is to assess what the need is, and to identify little steps towards making progress as well, which we always negotiate with the family and with the child if they're able to be able to negotiate that with you as well. So it's those tiny steps, but providing that specialism, just like Monal said, enabling somebody else to then be able to practice. So it's great tonight that we've got parents who are able to tune in and find out what it is they can do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm hoping to learn a lot, and as I can tell already, I will be. It's great to have you guys, so thank you so much for being here with us. Now, don't forget, if you stick around until the end of the show, you'll be able to put your personal questions to our experts in our live Q&A. You will have close to about 30 minutes where our specialists can answer and support you personally with your specific queries. So don't wait, start sending in your questions now, and hold on to see if yours is answered later in the show. Our panel are very excited to answer your question, aren't you guys?
Yes.
Can't wait.
So, guys, what are you hoping that parents watching tonight will get out of the session?
So really, I think some confidence about where their own child is in terms of learning to talk and understand words, and how they can help their children. We know that parents quite often worry, particularly if it's a first child, and you're never quite sure where they need to be for their age. I think parents sometimes kind of look at other children the same age and sort of make some judgments, or other family members can kind of judge where children are at. So what we're hoping is to kind of to give some top tips that families can use to help their children, and perhaps to allay some concerns as well, but also maybe to help people find out where to go if they need some extra help.
Brilliant. Right, so for those who have just joined in, welcome to the BBC Tiny Happy People Facebook Live, where we speak about all things speech and language with me, Harry Judd. And three experts. I'm not an expert in speech and language. I'm here to talk to these three experts. But before, as we said earlier, there'll be a Q&A. But before we go into the Q&A, I want to play a few games to kick-start the conversation. Now, as parents, we often see lots of information flying around the internet about children's development and language, and there are a lot of misconceptions out there. While we have them here, I think it's a good idea to ask the experts and get some straight answers. So, with that in mind, we're going to play a little game that has been creatively named Myth or Fact. Now, as you can see here, we have several different coloured balls inside my bingo cage. I'm calling it my bingo cage because I've taken quite a likening to it. These guys have been seeing, have been practising a lot with it. Now, these balls all correlate to a myth or a fact, and I have in front of me here. And it's up to our SLTs to let us know whether indeed they are myths or facts. And for you watching online, please do flood the chat with your answers too. If you think the statement is a myth, then write M, and if you think it might be a fact, then write F. OK, let's get into it. We'll spin the cage and see what happens. You ready, guys?
Yep.
We're ready.
All right, let's do this. Fingers crossed it works. OK, that's 2 spins. 3. Don't panic. 4, 5. OK, this... Oh, we got one.
Yay.
I'd like you to know that that worked first time in the practice, but we're away. We have a pink ball. So here we go. Right. Learning more than one language will hinder a child's speech and language development. Manal, what do you think?
It's definitely a myth.
Myth?
Yeah.
I thought so.
I mean, there are countless benefits to children learning more than one language. Babies are actually born ready to learn languages, and they absorb all the languages that they're exposed to right from birth. So if you do bring up your child with more than one language, research shows that it helps to develop your brain, your self-confidence, your well-being, your ability to learn better at school. And also, if you learn languages earlier on in life, it's easier to learn languages as an adult.
It's amazing. I've got a niece and nephew that speak Dutch and English. It's incredible how quickly they learn it.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to point out not to have the pressure on parents to maybe feel like their children have to learn another language. I mean, I have 3 and they just speak English because there's lots of other things, but it is a huge advantage if those are in doubt.
Absolutely. I think it's really just dispelling the fear that bilingual parents might have that they should stop using their home language
Right.
just because we're living in an English-speaking
Sure.
majority
Right.
world.
So that is a myth.
That's a myth.
Right, here we go. Oh, there's already a ball on there. That was quick. Right, a green one. OK, this is a good one. Myth or fact, using a dummy is delaying my child's speech and language.
Ooh, well, it could be myth and it could be a fact. For most children, after the age of 1, it might actually have an effect on their speech development.
Really?
So, yeah, so we would recommend gone by 1.
That only works in your accent, I think.
Is
Gone
that
by
right?
one.
Yeah. So once children start turning the babble into first words, having the dummy in for prolonged periods of time
Yeah.
can actually impact on the way that the tongue moves to make sounds. And we get a lot of children who have had prolonged use where they're using the back of the tongue more than the front. So for children over 1, yes, that would be a fact.
Really? So you'd be encouraging parents to maybe try and remove the dummies after 1?
Yeah, I think so, and particularly during the day. So I think what you don't want to have is children talking around the dummy. Take the dummy out if they are still using it when they're starting to talk. Maybe just keep it at night and try and wean them off it. But actually, if you get rid of it before they're 1, it's much easier because then they won't remember it. Whereas the longer you leave it,
Yeah.
the harder it is
Because
to.
it's a bit of a taboo subject. I remember sometimes I think grandparents sort of frown upon their children having their grandchildren using dummies or soothers because they are soothing for
Yes.
children. And I remember having children. I was desperate for my baby to take the soother because they're crying so much.
Yes.
So you can understand why parents use it. Have you got any tips on maybe any parents out there watching to wean them off these soothers or dummies?
I think it's like Louisa said, it's about moderating the amount of time you use it. So, absolutely, if your child's not sleeping and you're absolutely shattered, then those are the times to use it. But just gradually reducing the time, particularly in the day, and then gradually at night as well.
This is for my benefit, sorry.
Yeah?
I just thought my son is a thumb sucker. Is that going to impact speech and language development?
Not necessarily. So for some children that might buckle the front teeth, so
Okay.
it might cause a slight lisp. But again, when you play, you take your thumb out to play, so
Yeah.
children are less likely to have it in for long periods of time. So we don't see as much impact of thumb sucking as we do with dummy sucking.
Right, good to know.
yeah.
Lucky you can keep sucking your thumb. Right, how has this happened? There's another ball in there already.
Amazing.
Right, White. Myth or fact, speech therapy is only for children.
Oh, that's a myth.
It's a myth.
Yes.
Yes.
So we're here today to talk about children, but actually as a profession, speech language therapists see all age groups, so we see adults as well.
Well, sometimes you see, people that have been in the public eye with speech and language problems, which is a good thing because it's raising awareness for people. And
Yes, that's right. So so there are people who've had perhaps cancer of the head and neck, who speech and language therapists have helped, people who've had a stroke or a head injury.
Yeah.
And then we also work with the elderly as well, so people who might have dementia. So lots of people can have difficulty with communicating. I mean, it's our job and our passion to make sure that children don't have longer term difficulties, and when they do, we're there to help overcome those difficulties.
Brilliant.
In the way that our adult colleagues do that with grown-ups.
wonderful. Sorry, I just can't wait to spin my wheel again. Right, there we go. Yes, we have a blue. Right, here we go. Myth or fact, my child doesn't talk or respond yet, so they must be lazy.
I think we'll all agree it's a myth, right?
Yes.
Every child develops differently, and just because a child is not speaking, it doesn't mean that they're not communicating.
Yeah.
Because communication also involves listening and understanding. So while it might be easy to say that, oh, they're being lazy, they're not trying, actually they are absorbing a lot of what you're saying. So don't stop talking to them, don't stop interacting with them, and maybe try and increase the opportunities that they have to use their language. So rather than asking closed questions, you know, maybe give them a phrase. Like if you're playing with a train, you can say, look, here's a choo-choo train. What is, you know, don't say what is it, but here's a, and then leave a gap so that they know that that's their turn to then try and say something.
Okay, yeah. Interesting. I'm literally thinking, right, tomorrow I'll get that with Lockie, get the choo-choo train out. We've got less. There we go. We've got a pink one. Here we go. Myth or fact? Children can't be tested for language concerns until they're in school.
Ooh, that's definitely a myth.
Yes.
So we work with children right from birth in some instances. And
Really?
Yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a standardised test, but we can look at lots of observations of how children interact. So everything from are they looking, are they taking turns, do they respond when you talk to them? So lots of things we can do from a very, very early
So
age.
it's not just speech and language necessarily, it is communication and...
Yeah, it's the whole, yeah.
I see. So that's definitely a myth. Right, oh, another one's popped in straight away. Yellow. So myth or fact? All children will develop language skills in their own time. I'm guessing this is a fact.
Well, it's a kind of a bit of both, really.
Okay.
So I think, yes, every child develops at their own rate.
Yeah.
Children are learning lots of skills, particularly in the early years. Some of them are, you know, more active. They're going to be more kind of running around. They might develop physical skills a bit ahead of maybe talking. You know, some are real talkers but not very active. So, you know, you can't be good at everything. Some children are better at other things. But actually... there's also a danger, I think, of leaving it sort of too long and saying, oh, he'll grow out of it. I'm saying he because quite often it is boys.
Yes.
You know, people's expectations of boys as communicators are perhaps a little bit different from what we expect girls to be doing. So whilst I would say, yes, definitely, every child is different and parents know their own child well, you know, if you're concerned, you know, do something about it. You know, look at all the Tiny Happy People resources, see where you think your child is for, you know, a rough comparison of their age. Don't leave it too late if you are worried.
I've got my own little myth or fact here. I'm going to hijack the game slightly. But with my son, my middle son, me and my wife instinctively feel it's really important to help him with his speech and language so that he can communicate his emotions, because he's a very emotional boy and it can sometimes come out in anger or and so we're often trying to help to calm him down so he can explain his emotions, because sometimes all they have is the tears and the anger, and I'm sure a lot of people watching tonight can relate to that.
Absolutely, yes, and you know, it's not called the terrible twos for nothing, is it? You know, that's I don't know how old your middle one is. I think he's possibly a bit
Terrible fives.
Terrible fives.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, part of what parents do with very young babies is help them to regulate their own emotions.
Yes.
Babies can't regulate their own emotions. That's why they need us to cuddle them and to give them that warmth and reassurance. And that carries on as children get older, and as they learn language. That, as you absolutely spot on, you give them that language of emotions. So, you know, I can see that you're really angry. I can see that you're really upset. I can see you're really happy. So that you're giving them those words to use, because actually once we are able to describe how we're feeling, it does help us.
Does help, yeah.
To manage.
Yeah,
those
even
feelings.
as an adult.
Indeed.
So there we go. I came up with a fact, guys. Just,
Yeah.
very pleased about that. That's all we have time for that game. I feel like I've learned a lot already, and we haven't even got to our Q&A yet. And now, quick time for a couple of shout-outs. Let's see. Well, I hope we've had it. Yes, we have. Good. Bruna from Facebook says, I'm so happy with this live. I'm also an SLT. So that's brilliant. Hi, Bruna. Hopefully some inspiration for her. Emily says, such an insightful panel. Well done, guys. You're doing well. Anne from Facebook says, the professionals are brilliant in helping us understand. And Aria from Facebook says, I'm so shocked at what the myths are. Brilliant. Well, we've done a good job so far, guys. Don't forget to keep your questions coming in for our experts. We'll be answering them very soon. Now, your baby is trying to communicate with you from the moment they are born, but it's not always easy to work out what they're trying to say. especially the fact that they can't speak. So there are some key signs you can look out for to get an idea of what they're trying to communicate. So we're going to go through some of these signals now and put our experts to the test. It's time to play another game. It's called Say It Without Saying It. So, guys, I'm going to share some scenarios that will be very familiar to parents, and all you guys need to do is make the signal that a baby might do in this scenario. Does that make sense? Okay, looking a bit nervous there. Right, scenario 1. So, what signal would we be looking for if your baby was hungry?
You might have
Probably fingers in mouth.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Biting them.
No talking, please, guys.
Oh gosh,
Just-
sorry.
Really? Yeah.
And it will escalate. Ah.
Yes, right. So it's the starting point. So you maybe want to try and catch this early so we don't get to the escalation. Right. Great tip. Right. Scenario number 2. Tired. Okay, so basically it always ends in tears.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife seems to have an amazing instinct. She'll say with our kids, she'll be like, oh, I can tell he's tired, he's tired. I'm like, how do you know?
They
Cries
rub their
do
eyes as well,
sound
don't they?
different. You
Yeah.
tune into that. They do sound different.
The different
There's
cries
a
are
tired
different.
cry and a hungry cry.
A distress cry,
Yes.
an
Pain
attention-seeking
cry.
cry as well.
There are
Yes.
little cues as well because the face goes a bit paler before they do the bringing the hands
Yes,
to
the
the face. So,
colour.
yeah, and the more you tune into your baby, the more you start to pick those things up.
Yeah, and also I find with our 1-year-old, you start to have a bit of a schedule to the day. So the different times in the day, you know, oh, it's his snack time, you know, he's
Yeah, and
They
hungry.
must be hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thinking, where's my, you know, cheesy cheddars? What's going on here? You know. Right, scenario 3, needing to burp. That's a good one.
Oh, you might get this. Yeah. There were definitely some body movements.
Yeah.
I know we're not supposed to be talking, but speech therapist.
Yeah, we can't help it.
You can, because it does probably feel a bit
A little
ridiculous,
Perhaps
doesn't
they
it?
go red in their
Yeah.
face, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yes. I tell you, I don't know about you guys if you've experienced this, but one of the most satisfying things is getting a baby to burp. The sort of slight pushing of the back, and it's so good. Sometimes as well, sound. You can hear a bit. Is that right? You're kind of looking at me slightly.
before
yeah,
that,
that sort of discomfort, the sort of different
They definitely will
sound.
show some discomfort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, I certainly show discomfort when I need to burp. So, scenario 4, wanting to play. Now, this is a difficult one.
Oh,
Yes,
so
Oh,
that-
there we go.
Yeah.
wide eyes.
Wide eyes, right? Okay.
And maybe sitting up and
Yeah.
Maybe reaching.
leaning in.
reaching, yeah.
Reaching. Bit too much chat going on here, guys.
Sorry.
I just
Oh,
want-
sorry.
Yeah. Reaching for toys.
We weren't sure if you could see us opening our eyes.
Smiling as well.
Okay, nice. Well, now I know when they want to play. So here we go. Our last scenario. It's an interesting one. It's very advanced, I feel, for a baby. It's time to stop now. Oh, right. Really? Do you know what? One of the first things, my youngest, literally does that.
Yeah.
And today was the first time he gave me one of them. I was changing his nappy and I was chatting to him. So, you know, silly baby talk that you do with your babies. We need to change your nappy, don't we? We need to change your nappy. And he just goes, yeah. And I was like, wow, does he
Yeah.
understand?
Yeah.
At 1, they would start
And
to
that,
understand.
and that baby talk isn't silly. Your
No.
baby will love that baby talk.
Really?
That rise and falling intonation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, the way your voice goes up and down.
Mine's
Is
often very high.
They
Yeah.
love that too.
They love it. It gets their attention, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Keeps their attention, that's the main thing.
Okay, right, okay, that's good to know. Well, I had a nod today, that was very satisfying. Well, I think that's everything. Can you think of any other scenarios, guys, important ones to look out for?
No, I think it's just about observing your own child because they're all different, aren't they? They'll all give off their own little cues. So if you can just tune into them and spend time thinking, oh, when this happened, that was the result of it. So, like you say, if you can stop some of those things before it leads to crying, then even
Yes.
better. So picking up those cues earlier on. So the more time you spend together, the more likely that is to happen.
And just because babies can't verbally speak, they're still communicating with us, and it's really, you know, for us to notice what those signs are, the way they move their body, or the way they change their, you know, eye contact with you, or even like you mentioned, you know, the sound that they make, the changing cries, and
Yeah, and you said earlier about how it's really important to talk to your baby. Now, I think that's a thing that a lot of parents do naturally anyway. But why is it so important to speak to your baby when you assume they can't really understand you?
well, I mean, the basis of language is giving vocabulary words, helping them to sort of hear. You're their role model, basically. The parents are the people who the baby makes the first communication bond with, so they're used to your voice. And by talking to the child, you're actually setting them up to start loving language, and then giving them that model to be able to use it when they're ready to use those words.
And
they
another
will be
thing I
ready.
heard as well is about, so when I'm reading stories to my older children, and even to the younger one, is to be really expressive with the way you read the stories, with your, almost use it as an opportunity to, you know, hone in some of your acting skills, right?
Absolutely, and it doesn't matter if you're not a really confident reader either, because you can look at the pictures together, you can talk about the story in a book, you can say, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. You can leave a pause, you know, when your child's a little bit older, and see if they'll fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
So, oh, what can we see on this picture? And you've probably found this, reading the same book over and over again, children love that familiarity, and you can kind of get halfway through and then stop, and then your child will carry on the story.
Yeah.
So it's not a test of reading, it's really about enjoying books together.
Yeah, and I
It's that
guess...
interaction. Sorry, it's you know. So babies are born hardwired to communicate. So they're seeking it out from the day that they're born. So and they really tune into it. We call it parentees. So that rise and fall that you talked about. They love that. Their brains will pick up those sounds much more easily than if it's just a monotone voice coming out. Yeah. So the more animated you can be, the better.
Yeah, there's even a video on the Tiny Happy People website.
Yes, there is.
of a baby,
There you go.
looking at the brain waves. So it's
Really?
really, scientific fact.
And actually, because you mentioned that, there's another research on the Tiny Happy People page, and where Dr. Michelle, I think, has asked a parent to increase the number of words that she's using with her child. So they recorded her on day one when she was just talking normally, same number of words. And then the second day, when she was actively using more words with her child, I think she increased it by 700 words, and her child's response increased by 300 words.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they always say, like, my parents, you know, knowledgeable, grandparents, they know best, you know, that they are, children are sponges. They just, they pick up so much when they're young. And also, I think it's probably important to keep reiterating to the people at home that every child's different as well, and comparing your child to another's is not necessarily helpful. You know, I have 3 and they're very different with my daughter and my son. The way that I'll read, that first of all, they want completely different stories and things that capture their imagination. And I have to kind of read them in very different ways. If I try and stop and look at the words of my son, he gets frustrated. He just wants to look at the pictures.
Yeah.
So I guess that boils down to all these kind of things we're talking about. It's very much, I guess, down to the individual as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think following your child's lead is really important as well. I think sometimes as adults we get a fixed idea of this is how you should read a book, this is how you should play a game, you know, this is how you should do a jigsaw puzzle. But actually, for your child, it's playing. So it doesn't really matter if you don't get to the end of the book or you don't finish the puzzle, as long as you've had a nice time and you've talked and you've used loads of language and your child's had an opportunity to interact with you, whether that's with words or turn taking or how, you know, whatever age they are, then actually that's great. You know, that's a really nice experience. So, you know, I think parents shouldn't feel they have to do the game in the right way. That actually following a child's lead, and that, you know, that's fun. You can play with an empty box and just make a den or see what the child wants to do.
I definitely agree. I mean, communication is fluid. It's not static. So why would the activities or the expectations for how someone communicates be static as well? So, you know, when parents are playing with their children, exactly what you said, you know, you can't sort of have a fixed, rigid way of doing it.
Are these things as well that have been discovered over time? Because, you know, the different generations of styles of parenting, I feel like it's constantly developing, and the advice that we're giving to parents is constantly evolving. Because I find the way I parent sometimes, I can hear my parents saying it, but actually there's, I assume, a new way of communicating and teaching your children how to do it.
I think, but a lot of the basics have never changed. So, you know, in terms of human interaction, being with somebody face to face, having that close time, eye contact, taking turns, sharing an interest. It doesn't, that hasn't changed over all the generation. What has changed is the world around it. So there's a lot more technology now. There are a lot more distractions in lives, and families are so busy now. So to fit all that quality interaction time's really tricky. And I think sometimes we have to take some of that blame off ourselves and think, let's just enjoy this moment while it's here. So
we've realised we're having to get up earlier to try and fit all the things. So, well, really interesting stuff. Thank you, guys. If you want to find out more about any of these different cues and signals, there are loads of great pieces of information on the Tiny Happy People website, which is bbc.co.uk/Tiny Happy People. Everything on there is written in collaboration with speech and language therapists and other experts in early learning. So you can always trust that the information you're getting is right. OK, and over to you guys again for a few shout-outs. Who have we got here? We've got Becky Ann on Facebook says, so happy to see SLT highlighted in this way. Well done to the panel. I'm also an independent SLT and think it's just brilliant. Caroline from Facebook says, Tiny Happy People is a fab website for activities to help with speech. Leslie on Facebook says, really great practical advice. Good work, everyone. And finally, Anne from Facebook says, great comments for parents who aren't confident readers, which I'm not actually either. So I find it a good opportunity when I'm reading to my kids to practice for when I'm presenting things. So while we've all been enjoying these games with you, it's now time for the part of the show that we guess you've all been waiting for. It's our live Q&A with our speech and language experts. And you lot at home have been sending in your questions by the bucket load. So, panel, you guys ready to jump in?
Yep.
You ready for the questions? OK, so first up, we have Nicole from Facebook, and she has asked, how can I encourage my 16-month-old to associate words... Oh, hang on a sec. Something's popped up here, so I can't see the rest of the question. I'll jump to the next one. We'll go back to that. Kate... Oh, no, it's back. Nicole from Facebook asks, how can I encourage my 16-month-old to associate words with objects? She just grunts or cries rather than pointing.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we learn words is in context and in lots of everyday opportunities. So if she's naming and labelling those things while they're present, eventually your child will pick up those words. They might not say them straight away, so you normally understand something a few months before you'll actually be able to talk about it. There's always that little gap between understanding and talking. But, just persevere with it. Keep labelling, keep naming things, show them in different contexts. So if it's a dog, for example, you might show a toy dog, you might show a real dog, you might look at dogs in storybooks. But the more you're going to hear that word, that label associated with the real thing, the more likely that is to turn into a word. So just persevere.
Repetition.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and try not to force it as well.
Yeah.
I think sometimes as parents we can become a bit anxious that children aren't saying things. And I think, your anxiety then spills over into them and they can get a bit anxious about talking. So I would try and take that kind of pressure off yourself and just do exactly what Janet's done. Give it time, it will come. You can try sometimes with a bit of a choice. So you could say, do you want the teddy or the ball? And you can hold them out. And if they just take the teddy, you could just say, well, there you go, you've got the teddy. So you're not forcing it, but you're giving them the word each time with the object so that they get to understand that teddy is a teddy.
Sometimes use of gesture can help as well. So if they can't form the words, they might be able to do the gesture for dog or whatever. So, showing that alongside might be useful as well. It doesn't have to be formal gesture.
Exactly. And also, if they're not making a variety of speech sounds, it might be nice to actually do some oromotor exploration as well. Just non-words, so just doing buh, 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 getting them to actually look at how you're moving your lips so they can then copy that. So it's not necessarily a label for a word, but they're exploring with different sounds. So when it comes to making a word, they've actually got access to that.
Clever, aren't they, babies?
They really are.
Things like that. Katie from Instagram asks, my 4-year-old is only saying single words and copying others, but not having a conversation yet. Is there any advice to help with this?
OK, so, by the age of 4, we would expect them to start using longer phrases and sentences and be able to communicate verbally thoughts and their needs and wants. So it probably might be an idea to check in with the GP and get referred to a speech and language therapist to get some ideas and tips on how to extend that. But at the age of 4, you know, you want to look at other things like her attention and listening, what her understanding of language is like as well. Her play skills.
There's also a technique called add a word. So if she is speaking single words, when you model that back, you add a word to it. So, you know, if she says bear, you say, oh yes, it's a big bear or a little bear. So they're always hearing a model of a slightly longer sentence. And that's quite useful. And that is on the Tiny Happy People website. There are some activities to go with that too.
Yeah. And sorry, I was just going to say that Speech and Language UK has got a progress checker on our website. So if parents are concerned, they're not quite sure where their child is, they can go on to the Speech and Language UK. There's a link actually from the Tiny Happy People website. Just answer a few questions and it'll tell you kind of, you know, where your child is for where they should be for their age. And we've also got a free inquiry service, so you can actually book a call with a speech and language therapist to get some free advice.
Amazing. Well, there you go, Katie. Take the free call. So the takeaway is not to worry, don't panic. There is plenty of help out there. Great. So a common question being asked on Instagram is, my child was speaking clearly, but now has started stammering sometimes. Is this something to be worried about? And what advice do you have on stammers?
So variety of advice, depends on the age of the child, but certainly for little children, which is generally what we're talking about today, there is quite a normal period of non-fluency where suddenly they've got this burst of language that's come from nothing to sentences, and often that's where children are hesitant and they repeat words or repeat the syllable like mummy before they say the word. And a lot of that can be supported by what we do, not by changing what the child does. So slowing down the situation, not bombarding the child with too many questions, stopping some of the conflict like background noise and that kind of thing, so the child has more time to think and process before they say, you know, whatever sentence they're trying to say. And just being an active listener as well, while they're trying to formulate all these complicated sentences, just to keep that eye contact and wait and be patient. And a lot of the children will then progress through that and become fluent. If they don't, obviously there's lots of support out there. So there is stammer.org, which is a website, but equally, you know, again, that might be something a speech therapist might need to support you with.
A tip that a lot of my parents have found useful is getting the child to actually become aware of their breathing. And then once they're aware of how they breathe into their tummy and then out through their mouth, you then say, OK, now I want you to take a deep breath in, I want you to blow the word out. So what that does, it softens, it sort of slows them down automatically without you actually telling them to slow down. And it helps them to make some smooth speech sounds.
That's brilliant. I mean, breathing, you're finding more hearing about the importance of breathing, and as you say, breathing into your tummy, because a lot of people breathe into their chest and they tense up, and you know
that's linked to anxiety, and often anxiety
is linked to anxiety.
Is linked to stuttering.
Exactly, and it's the same in anything with me, like with performance. When I'm playing the drums, if I'm tense and nervous, then my technique is completely compromised, and constantly reminding yourself to relax. Okay, great. So one audience member has asked, there are 3 languages spoken in my house. Is that too many to expose my child to when they don't speak any words yet? I'm guessing no.
Absolutely not. I mean, they're 3 years old?
No, it says...
3 languages.
Yeah, 3 languages, yeah, but they're not speaking yet.
But they're not speaking... No, that's fine. Like I said, babies are actually ready to learn languages, so throw as many languages as you want. There's no reason why that would cause a language delay at all. You're actually arming them with a lot of vocabulary words. You're arming them with being able to choose different ways to communicate with. So, no, absolutely, carry on. Doing that.
and I think the thing to be aware of is in the UK we're a real exception in that most people only speak one language. Almost every other country in the world, I don't know what the percentage is, but loads of other countries it's absolutely typical to speak at least one or two or three languages at home. So, you know, we're the exception in just speaking English.
Yeah, I think the demographics are changing anyway constantly, and I mean, UK is so diverse. Multicultural, so yeah, I think we're
more languages.
Exactly, and cultures, it's beautiful. Yeah.
Great. Another common question being asked is, can having an older sibling or a newborn in the family affect or delay a child's speech?
Yeah, shall I take that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think to take the older ones first, I think sometimes older children will speak for younger children, and that can mean that actually there's less incentive for the younger child to say things, because quite often, you know, they don't really need to. because we communicate when we need to and when we want to, and if our every need is met sort of before we have to say anything, and sometimes an older sibling will anticipate what a younger sibling needs, so they'll give them a drink or they'll give them the toy and play and sort of talk for them. So there is that, and I think it's something that we need to be aware of as parents. If you've got more than one child, just to make sure that the younger siblings have a little bit of time and space to do the talking. And I think that having a newborn sibling for a child can be disruptive in lots of different ways, and sometimes we see children sort of going back to being a little bit more babyish. So a child who's sort of come out of nappies or given up the dummy or is doing something, sleeping in their own bed, will kind of go back a little bit when there's a newborn in the house. And sometimes I think that's a little because the newborn's getting lots of attention. So, if
they
you
want to go back to being a baby, yes. Brilliant. Okay. Is there any advice for children who have developed a lisp? What can I do to support my child?
Yeah, so a lisp is when your tongue comes forward of your teeth when you're saying sounds like S. And in little children, that's quite normal because the teeth aren't fully formed and they still haven't worked out where to place the tongue, and the tongue isn't particularly toned up. So in under fives, it's not really an issue at all. Doesn't impact on their intelligibility, and I wouldn't do anything about it. No. If the children are slightly older and they're starting to be aware of it and it is impacting on the way that they're speaking and other people are reacting to that, then there's some really quick top tips, like just seeing if they can practice a sound on its own. And a simple way to describe it is to bite your teeth together. If your teeth are closed, your tongue can't sneak through the gap. So just seeing if they can imitate it. But on the whole, it's not a major issue. Doesn't really impact on children's language learning or intelligibility. And there are quite a lot of adults out there with lisps.
Yeah, well, do you know what? My bandmate, Tom, he had a bit of a lisp, particularly when he was singing. And actually, fun fact, I'm going to expose him here, but he was originally in Busted. And he went into the studio. There was originally a four-piece, and he sung, and the producer didn't like the fact that he had this kind of lisp. But it's a good thing because he ended up creating with
Well, there you go.
There you go.
So there we go.
Just the only other thing to add with that is we talked about sort of saying back to children what they said and maybe adding a word. But if for children whose sounds are not quite the adult sound yet, don't try and correct them, don't try and make them say the right sound. So if they say, spoon, you could say, oh yeah, it's a spoon. So you say it the adult way, and they will start to notice that difference between the way you say it and the way they say it, and they will automatically correct it.
And a fun way to increase that awareness is to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And just say, oh, this is a spoon. Did I say that right? No. And then
they can say,
and they go, no, Mummy, not like that.
Okay, nice. So my son has this tendency to speak, feels like almost from the back of his mouth, with a slight sort of, sounds wrong, it's not like a snort, but almost as a bit nasal. But I guess it's not something we ever worry about, but I imagine it's a similar concept. You just keep talking and then they eventually develop the right way to, speak.
For a lot of children, sometimes if it's an unusual sound, that might indicate something else. So, you might want to check out hearing. You might want to check out whether there's any issues with tonsils and adenoids. So if they snore at night, that's another little telltale sign. So
maybe the dentist for the palate.
Yeah, so I think if it's an unusual sounding sound, if children are just substituting a sound for another English sound, then that is quite common. But if it's something a bit more unusual, you might want to get that checked out.
Yeah, and if you really can't understand what they say, if they're getting a bit older and you really can't understand, or they're getting really frustrated, or you're getting really anxious about it, then
And what was the one for snoring? What do you have to do for that?
Go to the GP and just check your adenoids.
So my wife needs to go to the GP. Right, okay.
Oh, bless.
Apparently I snore a bit too. So, Amanda says, any tips for encouraging a child that is selectively mute to speak? So I assume that means they choose not to speak.
Yeah, so selective mutism is when a child is choosing to speak in certain situations but not others, and often that is related, or in most cases, due to anxiety or fear of speaking. Maybe they're scared of the reaction they'll get. Maybe there is an underlying speech and language difficulty that they're aware of and they don't want to expose themselves. There are so many reasons for selective mutism, and the main thing is actually to really take the pressure off. Make them feel comfortable, let them know that any way that they communicate is acceptable. So any eye pointing or gestures, accept that as a meaningful communication and encourage them. Another tip is if they do happen to speak in a situation where they've never spoken before, don't make a big deal of it.
Yeah.
Praise
Tell
them.
Granny, tell Granny.
Yeah.
Definitely praise them, but maybe praise them at home when it's just the two of you, yeah.
Interesting. Well, I hope that helps. Amber says, is it common for a baby or toddler with a visual impairment to fall behind with speech and language development?
It can be, yes. I'm not an expert at working with children with visual impairment, but I do know that that our vision and language early on is quite connected, because obviously you're sharing what you're looking at and pointing at, and then your parent names that, or the adult around you names that. So I think for children who have a visual impairment, families are going to need to sort of work a little bit harder to perhaps help them to hold things and experience things through touch, and then put the language on top of that. So whatever your baby is experiencing, you're giving them like a running commentary, and that will work for all children, but I think particularly for children with a visual impairment.
Yeah, it links with the question you asked about learning first words. So, if a baby isn't going to see that dog out and about, to experience touching and feeling textures and those kind of more sensory experiences associated with the talking is going to help them learn as well. So it might be the strategies are just slightly different for children with visual difficulties.
And I guess it's teaching them to use the senses that they do have.
Yes, yeah.
So the touch, the hearing, the taste as well.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So April on Facebook says, can a child still develop normally with a speech delay with the right intervention? Will they be okay at school? I guess that's a lot of parents' big worry with lots of things. Will they be okay at school? But I'm sure even more so with this question. So any tips there, guys?
I mean, it depends. It's quite a sort of vague question, but if children have got speech difficulties...
Yeah, speech delay, it says here.
Yeah, so some of those children will catch up in time, some might need some support to catch up with the speech sounds. But teachers are very, very skilled, and if the child's accessing speech therapy, we would always work in liaison with each other. So, if it does impact on things like learning phonics, we'd make sure we're showing the teacher how you might adapt the way you're teaching that to that specific child. So it shouldn't impact, because again, we can adapt the way that we teach those children.
Seems to me it's a lot to do with the child's confidence as well, which I imagine we as parents can have a big impact on. And suddenly going into a classroom full of 29, 30 other children, some of whom are probably very confident and boisterous, can maybe make some children go into themselves even more. So I guess there's a lot to do with the mental sort of health aspect of it.
It is. I mean, we do know that some children do have longer term speech and language difficulties. Some children will have lifelong speech and language difficulties, and they will need specialist support. But there is a lot that parents can do to support their children. There are lots of places that you can look for resources. Lots of people who can give you advice, not just speech and language therapists, but early years, the nursery practitioners, teachers, health visitors. So if you are concerned about, your child, particularly when they're starting school, do start to look around and ask for help. And if you know which school your child is going to, you can go in and say, I'm a bit concerned. They might need some extra support. And one of the things that Speech and Language UK does is that we train early years staff and teaching staff in kind of how to spot speech and language difficulties and what to do with them and how to support them. And we've got a range of interventions that schools can put in place to help children to catch up as well.
Brilliant.
I think it's really important, because as speech and language therapists, we don't just take a snapshot look at the child's assessment and then say that, this is where they're at. We take a holistic viewpoint on the child. So we get to know their background, we get to know their personalities, their likes, their dislikes. We extensively sit with parents and their education care workers to find out sort of what their strengths are. And speech therapy is all about building on their strengths. They may not be able to say certain speech sounds, or they may be delayed with language, but it doesn't mean that they don't have communication skills. We just have to find out what those are and build on those.
Brilliant. This is an interesting one. Amanda on Facebook says, will cutting my child's severe tongue tie help his lack of speech?
So there's a variety of practice with tongue tie cutting now. It used to be kind of routine. If it was spotted at birth, it was cut immediately. For a lot of children, it doesn't impact on the speech, and they tend to only cut it when it impacts on the feeding. But for some children, if it's really... So the tongue tie is that little bit under your tongue that might hold your tongue right down. It might affect some of the sound making. But like I say, it's not routine practice to cut it anymore, so only if it is starting to affect the speech. I think if it's really severe, then it might make a difference. I don't know if...
Is that something you guys would be recommending, or going to see a specialist, maybe a doctor?
I think you'd have to see how much it's affecting the speech, really. So, like I say, when they're very little as babies, they only tend to cut it if it's impacting on the feeding and swallowing. And a little bit later on, if it was speech, then you might want a speech assessment just to see if it is actually affecting.
So as part of our assessment, we would actually look at the tongue movement and we'd be able to get an idea if the tongue tie is affecting their ability to raise their tongue to make sense.
So Natalie on Facebook says, what's the difference between language delay and apraxia of the speech, and why does it get misdiagnosed so much?
Okay, so, two very different things, aren't they?
Are they?
Yeah,
Really?
very.
So one is
So language delay is about the words, the vocabulary, the sentence production and the understanding of the words that are spoken to you. Apraxia of speech is production of speech sounds. And it's about motor programming, your brain being able to tell your muscles to move in a certain way at a certain time to make the sound. So that would be a speech difficulty. So they're quite separate things.
But I think perhaps one could look like another. So if you have a child who isn't really saying very much, then you could think, is that because they don't have the words in their heads to say, or is it because actually they can't literally get their lips and tongue to work to get the words out? And that's where you would need the specialist skills of a speech and language therapist to do that assessment. Once you've got that diagnosis, if it is apraxia, then there are lots of things that the people around your child can do to help, but you would need to have that initial assessment from a speech and language therapist.
It's really important to distinguish between the two because the treatment plan will be very different.
Okay, great. Now, this one seems interesting. I think I'd know the answer to this, but an audience member has asked, how do I avoid passing on my dyslexia to my child? Now, I assume, is that something that is a genetic thing and that's not something that's learned? Or are you born with dyslexia, or...?
Well, yes, you are. I mean, dyslexia is actually a reading difficulty. So as speech and language therapists, we tend to do more around talking rather than reading. But there are certainly links between dyslexia and more lifelong difficulties with speech and language, such as developmental language disorder. So that is a lifelong speech and language challenge. There is probably a genetic aspect to both of those conditions in that we do see them kind of occurring in families. So, we're not responsible for our genetic makeup in terms of passing on. But I think, there are, if we have some anxieties, we talked earlier about literacy, reading, and people being confident in terms of reading. If you are dyslexic, and you're not very confident at reading, there are other ways of looking at books with your child. You can still look at books, you can still talk about the pictures, you can get your child to tell you the story and things. So I think, that anxiety about reading doesn't need to be passed on, even if you may suspect that your child may find it more difficult to learn to read. But again, there are loads of things that schools can do now to help children who are struggling with reading.
Okay, great. Antonia says, my 3-year-old has autism and can't communicate. Do you have any advice?
Well, autism, there's a spectrum.
Yes.
So I mean, it's difficult to sort of give specific advice without knowing exactly sort of what their skills are.
Yeah, Antonia says she's 3 and, well, my 3-year-old, and can't communicate yet.
Okay.
I imagine that's quite common, as you say. It depends on where they are on the spectrum.
Where they are. I mean, we have to see also what they're able to understand as well, how far their play skills have developed. It's not just about the words that they're using. And just because a child with autism cannot use words, it doesn't mean that they don't have other means or other strategies in which to communicate with. So there's alternative augmentative communication, which is basically visual boards that you can use. So that helps to support a child with autism. But you know, more often than not, if a child is non-verbal and 3 with a diagnosis of autism, then you do want to get the specialist involved to help with all the aspects of their learning, their social integration. Yeah.
And it's unlikely they can't communicate, it's just they're communicating differently.
Differently,
So it's
exactly.
working out what that
Yeah.
communication is, whether it is the hand up by the face when they're
Yeah,
tired,
sure,
or,
sure.
you know, so I think it's about tuning into the things they can do and
Well,
working
that's,
on those.
yeah.
Yes.
I'm sure that's nice for Antonia to hear. Here's an interesting one. Mel on Facebook asks, is speech delay more common in twins?
There's a lot of twin studies out there, actually. Yeah, yeah. A lot of twins will sort of create their own language.
Really?
And because their needs are met, like Louisa talked about having your needs met, so the older sibling often meets those, your twin can often meet those needs. So sometimes there is this twin talk, which means that they don't always communicate with others in the developmental pattern that we see in single children. But it doesn't have to be like that, but there are lots more twins who might be a little bit slower with the milestones than perhaps a single child would be.
And within twins as well, there might be just, it's the one twin that has difficulties in speaking, but the other twin is speaking for them.
Yeah.
So it's sort of masking those difficulties.
Right.
It's really important, if you've got twins, to set time aside with each twin, like a special time, 5 minutes every day.
Separately.
Separately.
Yeah.
So you haven't got one talking for the other person,
Yeah.
other child, yeah.
And I imagine that can be the same for children close in age as well,
Yeah.
like we said
Yeah.
before, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's my friend's just had twins, so I'll
Oh,
pass that
okay.
one on to him.
Challenge.
Stacey, do you have any tips for helping 2-year-olds use more functional language and speak clearer? Mine can say a lot of words, but doesn't say what he wants. So he can say a lot of words, but I guess he's not really maybe making sense
Making
of, of what he wants. So saying the words, but maybe not in the right sort of context.
So she might be talking about echoing words, maybe,
Yes.
rather
I
than
see.
say.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
that's perhaps how we've understood it. So again, it's exactly what we said earlier about continuing to feed those words in at the right appropriate time, and eventually they'll start to make sense and be used at the right appropriate moments. But you know, I think the fact that they're trying and they're making sounds, you know, really reinforce that and be positive, react to those utterances. They might sound completely gobbledygook, and it might be the child is trying to say the word, but they just not got the right sounds yet. So the more you react to that and model back the right words, so, oh, yes, it is, it's a teddy bear.
Do you know, I remember my middle child doing that. He'd sort of just talk absolute gobbledygook, but it was so sweet. You know,
Yeah.
me and my wife go, oh, really, is that right? You know,
And you probably interpret it back, didn't you? So,
Yeah.
oh, you're wanting the...
but you can tell he's probably just copying the parent and hearing them talk, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
But that's part of how children learn. So that kind of intonation pattern. So
Intonation,
we talked about that, you know, really high, the parent ease when you're changing the nappy and you're going, oh, you know, shall we tickle your tummy? So that instant, you know, they tune into that, and they know that that grown-ups talk in a long chain of sounds that goes up and down. So that's what they're copying, and then there might be the odd word in there to start with, and then gradually they'll build up more words. But what I'm sorry, I can't remember the person's name, but what you can do with your 2-year-old is that when they're playing a game, if you talk about what they're doing, so we talked about following the child's lead, if, you know, whatever he's wanting to play with, you can talk about what he's doing, so you're like giving a commentary about what he's doing, and then he's learning the function of the words. So, you know, television doesn't mean anything unless you know that this is a television. So, you know, we all have a shared agreement about what that is. So, you know, that's how we learn. That's how we learn language. And children do copy words and use nonsense words as kind of fillers while they're learning to talk. But again, you know, if it goes on beyond 2, if he's still 3, and he's still doing that sort of nonsense talk, or you're really not sure what he's saying, then at that point it's probably a good idea to kind of use our free inquiry service or talk to your local speech and language therapy service.
so what I'm kind of getting from this is that, first of all, there's plenty of amazing options out there for all those people that have asked questions. And also, for the parents out there, a lot of the things that you're advising, it doesn't seem that overwhelming. It's very much talking to your child as much as you can, reading the stories, interacting with playtime. It's not really sort of technical stuff that you have to learn. It's just interacting with your children.
Absolutely. It's the easiest thing that you can do with your child is to talk, because we all talk. You know, you don't have to be confident at reading, you don't have to be, you know, confident with maths. You know, when your child gets to school, you'll have to help with all of those things. But actually, what you can do from the moment your baby's born, or actually even when baby's still in your tummy, is talk.
Yeah.
And we can all do that. So
We used to play music to
yeah.
Yeah.
when my wife was
Yeah.
pregnant.
I think the main thing as well is making it fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
The more it can be fun and you enjoy it, then
Yeah.
you both get something from it. It isn't just about the child getting a benefit.
Exactly.
The adult gets a benefit
Make
too.
believe
Yeah.
games.
Yeah.
Bit of a parent hack for you guys is just play doctors and nurses, and you be the patient. You just get to lie down.
Just like-
You just get to lie down. It's great. Unfortunately, guys, that's all we have time for. The time has just flown by, and we have to bring our Q&A to a close. If we haven't got round to your questions, or you want to find out more about the topic of speech and language development, there is tons of information on the Tiny Happy People website, which is bbc.co.uk/Tiny Happy People. On there is a great selection of Q&A articles where you can find answers to your most frequently asked questions. We'll also be updating these with some of your amazing questions from this evening, so keep checking back to see if your questions have been answered. These will be on our homepage straight after the live has finished. And with that, I want to say thank you so much to our experts, guys. It's been great having you on. Thank you very much. You've provided us with some much needed information and tools that we can easily use at home to help with the development of our children's speech, language and communication needs. And of course, to everyone who's been watching at home or wherever you might be, thank you so much for tuning into BBC's Tiny Happy People's first ever live. Thank you so much and have a nice evening. Good way.
Mm.